Cross ice pass, score! Right off of the pass to the left side.
Check this.
Hello, hockey fans, and welcome back to Off the Post. I'm your host, Kyle Savage, and today we'll be covering Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Boston Bruins and the St. Louis Blues. But first, this podcast will be on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com. Be sure to get the TuneIn app to hear ChicagolandSportsRadio.com all the time. This will also be on Spreaker. Be sure to follow Off the Post to listen to this whenever you want, in the car, at your house, on a run, at work, whatever works for you. You can listen to past, present, and future podcasts. So, quick recap of Game 1. Blues scored twice by Shin and Tarasenko go up 2-0, and then they have 5 penalties along the lines of that. And they awaken the beast of the Boston Bruins. They shake off the rust, and Boston scores 4 unanswered goals by Clifton, McAvoy, Corelli, and Marchand. Boston was on an 8-game winning streak. Now that ended tonight. So let me run through the format real quick on how I do things. I will run through penalties and the goals. I will sit here on the computer when something happens in the game. I'll watch the game. I'll turn around and get all that stats, all those, and type those out, so you get a feel of how the game went as far as goals and penalties. And if you were to miss the game, didn't hear on the radio, along the lines of that, and you want to not read through everything, but you want to hear it, and then I will give my thoughts at the end of each period, give those stats of each period, and so on and so forth. So at 3:55, St. Louis Blues penalty by Sammy Bals, goalie interference. There was a controversy-ish, not really. Commentators were kind of bickering back and forth, not really, but they were saying, he was trying to get out of the way and ran into Rask, but in the end, it was goalie interference. But that led to a power play goal by Charlie Coyle, his 7th of the postseason, assisted by DeBrusk and Pastrnak. Then at 9:37 into the game, Blues score by Robert Bertuos, his 2nd of the postseason, assisted by Bozanic and Gunnarsson. It was deflected off for Bruin in front of Rask, and Rask was down in the butterfly, and it went top shelf on him. Nothing he really could do on that. 40 seconds later, at 10:17 into the first period, Bruins score by Joakim Nordstrom, third goal for him in this postseason, assisted by Corelli. A turnover by the Blues, Nordstrom with the backhand, and he was going to Bennington's right. Bennington's left, and Bennington was towards the far right goalpost, coming back over, and he left the 5-hole wide open. Nothing really he could do on that one. He was going right from left. So so Bruins go up 2-1, and then 14:55 into the first period, goal by Vladimir Tarasenko, his 10th of the postseason, assisted by Schwartz. Then a little bit later, St. Louis gets a penalty on Oscar Sundqvist for boarding on Grzelcyk. Grzelcyk ends up going out the rest of the game, so that bumps Boston down to 5 defensemen in this entire game. And you could say, well, that was, maybe a reason why Boston really didn't win, because they were kind of shorthanded. But there's been plenty of teams that have won games, that have won series, that are not top heavy in defensemen and are running 5 defensemen along the lines of that. So that can't really be an excuse. There's plenty of other excuses that we will get into a little bit later that they could, lean on more than not having 6 defensemen. Blues killed off. Bruins did look good. Just couldn't really get one past Bennington. That was the end of the period. Both teams looked very, very even. Give the edge a little bit to St. Louis because of their hits. But Blues really can't stay out of the boxes. And yeah, they end up winning the game, and they gave up 5 power plays. But if they would have given up one more power play, and especially in overtime, could have been deadly on their portion of it. But they didn't. They only gave up the 1, which is a good thing on their portion. That means the penalty killers are stepping up. They do step up. I mean, Blues do have a very good penalty killing core that is pretty decent at that, but it's a physical game, so it's going to come down to which team's going to be tired, and we all know which team ended up being tired. So it's tied 2-2. Let's just kind of look at the stats. Blues had 10 shots on goal. Bruins had 8 shots on goal. There was no power plays for the Blues. Bruins went 1 for 2 on the power play, 4 penalty minutes for the Blues, and 0 for the Bruins. Blues lead the faceoff dot 59-41. Blues had 7 block shots. Bruins had 4. Blues gave up the puck 7 times. Blues gave up the puck 7 times. Bruins only gave up the puck once. I'm gonna say this almost every time I look at the stat. I'm gonna say this until I stop covering hockey or until the day I die. The turnover ratio, or how they distinguish these turnovers, takeaways a little bit different, because you can those you can really distinguish, but the giveaways you can't really. There's a lot of factors that go into it. It's not black and white like football is. It's nothing along the lines of that. It's not that was a turnover. You don't see it. No, there's a fine line between that. But the odd thing is, I would do the takeaways, but when you go into the final stats, they don't talk about the takeaways. They only talk about the giveaways, which is odd. Why they don't allow that. I would have to go on the mobile device to do that, and sometimes, especially with the game going in overtime and it's almost midnight for me, I'm not going to concern about that too much, and I highly doubt you guys really care if I cover that or not. So we'll jump into the second period here. At 3:34, Bruins get they have their first penalty, Connor Clifton, for interference. Boston kills it off. Blues only have 1 shot on goal. Boston at this point has killed off 26 of 27 shorthanded opportunities, so their power play is looking very good. And now I know that they had a penalty in overtime, but since it was delayed call, that doesn't really count for a penalty kill. That won't count against them, and that is going to be an even strength goal with the goalie pulled. But then at 12:19, St. Louis gets a penalty by Joel Edmondson for tripping. Blues kill it off. Bruins looked horrible. They are, most teams that are hot on the power play, no matter what they do, it's going to go in. Well, I think the power play is starting to cool off, and they are starting to see that, because it's turning into, let's chip the puck in, let's try to get to it, but by the time they get to it, there's already a Blues player there hitting them and taking it and going back the other way with it. And then when they do get an opportunity, they completely miss the net. It reminds me of this year, the Chicago Blackhawks. I'm a big Blackhawks fan, and when their power play was on, it was hot on, red on, and then they started cooling off. Even their offense cooled off in total, everyone, and they just couldn't hit anything to save their life. The net could be 10 by 10, and they still couldn't hit the freaking thing. So that's what they're going into right now. It does get progressively a little better, but the shots on goal aren't where they need to be at that portion of it. So moving on, at 15:39, Boston gets a double minor penalty, Connor Clifton, for high sticking. The penalty, they killed off the first portion of it, and then the second portion of it at 17:56 was killed off by a Blues penalty by Jaden Schwartz for goalie interference. That's the second goalie interference that Tuukka Rask ended up pulling out of his bag of tricks. My TV cut out on me, so I didn't really see the penalty, and I was moving things around we have family members moving in for certain reasons, but I was helping out move things around that need to be moved around, and it didn't really seem like I was gonna miss too much, and I ended up missing a lot, but I didn't miss the 4-on-4 play, which was great. But so the double minor was negated by the Schwartz penalty. Then Bruins only had 17 seconds of power play time. So, really, they had like 4 penalties, or, 4 power play opportunities and like 2% of another penalty. You get what I'm trying to say there. Blues obviously killed off. That's the end of the second period. No scores. There was a lot of, that's a lot of penalties to take. That was not until towards the end of the period there was some penalties taking. You had the double minor, which led to great 4-on-4 hockey, and that was the highlight of that period, was the 4-on-4 hockey. I mean, both teams looked very good. Goalies played very well. It was an exciting period to watch, but the cherry obviously on top was the 4-on-4 hockey. But now it's coming down to, okay, both goaltenders are settled in. It's not like one's getting shafted. You know, Tuukka getting nailed with all these shots. Bennington's kind of having his night off, and that's kind of happens is when you give a goalie a night off, you're gonna end up losing. When you're on your side of the ice all the time, you're probably not gonna win the game. You have to be very lucky, and you have to have a goalie that's probably a walrus. So you're not gonna have that ability, no matter how good Tuukka is. It would have been very hard for him to win that game. It's not like they would come down, shoot the puck, and then it would go back the other side of the ice. He'd get a chance to get a breather. It's not like it was, easy shots. I mean, he had to face a couple hard shots, especially deflection that went past him. The other one by Vladimir Tarasenko was a difficult one to stop, and even with the overtime winner by Gunnarsson, he was screened and nothing he could do. I think he was double screened at that point. Well, actually, that was Gunnarsson going off the post. But he was still screened. There was nothing he could see. I mean, that thing was a rocket shot, and he didn't even see it. So that means St. Louis is getting in front of the net, and Boston is not clearing anyone out, and that needs to be changed. But we'll get into the second period stats here. St. Louis shots on goal. For some reason, my dumb self decided to combine the first two periods. So St. Louis had 24 shots on goal and Boston only had 14. And I meant to split that up into what the shots on goal actually were per period, but that's my bad. But all the rest of these stats are combined all together because they don't separate them up into periods like they do shots on goal. So St. Louis was 0 for 3 on the power play. Boston was 1 for 4 on the power play. St. Louis had 8 penalty minutes, and Boston had 6. St. Louis was 5 of 8, or 58% in the faceoff dot, and Boston was 43%. Both teams had 11 blocked shots. St. Louis had 13 giveaways. Boston had 5 giveaways. St. Louis had 33 hits to Boston's 19. That's going to wear a team out. And that's what ended up happening in overtime. We'll get more in discussion in that. But when that's 33 hits, so everyone's gonna get a chance to get hit pretty good. So that's something that Boston needs to look into and say, okay, maybe we need to change our style a little bit. But going into the third period, there was not much that went on. I got 2 bulletin points out of this. There was one penalty that I thought Boston was going to cash in on, but at 13:22 into the third period, St. Louis penalty on Brandon Shin for slashing. Blues killed off. Bruins looked better. They kind of set up. They had some setup, but it wasn't enough to get past Bennington. And that led to a minute 57 left into the third period. Gunnarsson had a beautiful, beautiful opportunity to put the Blues up, but he nailed the goalpost. Right off the goalpost. Rask was double screened. He had no chance at it, didn't see nothing, and that thing came flying out about 10 feet off that goalpost. That thing was a rocket shot off the goalpost, and I was like, dang. That could have really changed the game there. But breaking down the third period, it was kind of slow. I think both teams didn't want to make a mistake. And maybe we're thinking, okay, maybe we can get lucky or we're going to play for overtime. But then I would say about 9 minutes in, someone decided, I don't know if someone in the arena decided to turn the heat up, but both teams opened. It was open field, flying up and down the ice, block shots, very good shots. There was a couple goal posts. I know Boston had a very good. They had some key opportunities to block shots, and they did it. So that's one thing to look at. Is block shots are very good on that portion of it, but Boston yet they had that power play opportunity and they kind of, how do I say this in a way that's not mean? They kind of blew it away. They just said, we had our chance and we kind of blew it, but it is what it is. You can't let that happen. I'm sorry, you were in the Stanley Cup Finals. It's not regular season. This isn't game 2 of the first round. You got to take these opportunities and you got to score. Your top line's not producing. You got to look at your top line and say, why aren't you guys producing? That needs to be the number one reason. They kept talking about the perfection line from Boston. That's the Brad Marchand, the Pasternak, and along the lines of that. And there's nothing going on there. Yes, Brad Marchand has an empty netter. Ooh, we got an empty netter. I can score an empty netter. There's nothing special. They need that production. They're not getting that production from that top line. They cannot rely on Tuukka Rask. St. Louis is going to find a fault in the Boston Bruins, and we may have found it, that if you put pressure on Boston, too much pressure, they're going to crack, and the only one to save them is going to be Tuukka Rask, and they can't pull it out. Who'd they play in the second round? Who was it? Why can't I even think of their name? They're not going to be able to pull it out. Because this is obviously a team who is good. It was Blue Jackets. They played the Blue Jackets in the second round, and Blue Jackets hammered, but Tuukka Rask was there to save it. So what I'm saying is that this team they're playing a St. Louis team who is very, very good at hitting people and being very good at that aspect of things. But when you get 5 power play opportunities and you only cash in on 1 the past 2 games, so you went 2 for 10, that's 20%, right? And that's just not over a course of a couple games. That's 2 games. You got to tell me you can at least need to put at least 1 more in, but you don't. And so now, we're going to the third period, and this is either Boston's going up 2-0, or we're going back to St. Louis 1-1. We'll break down the third period stats here. Both teams had 9 shots on goal, and these shots on goal didn't really come until about 9 minutes left into the third period, but there was also a lot of shot blocking. St. Louis still 0 for 3 on the power play. Boston 1 for 5 on the power play. St. Louis had 10 penalty minutes. Boston had 6. St. Louis was 51% on the faceoff dot. Boston was 49%. St. Louis had 17 giveaways, and Boston had 9 giveaways. So going into overtime, it was we'll talk about the goal, and then we'll talk about what led up to the goal. So at 14:55 into the overtime, a delayed penalty, St. Louis Blues score on the overtime winner by Carl Gunnarsson, his first of the postseason, assisted by Riley and Sundqvist. And this was a message from the gods that Gunnarsson was going to finally score his first playoff goal of this year. He Tuukka Rask is double screened, he hits it off the goalpost. Well, he gets another opportunity. Tuukka Rask's screen can't see it, and bam, goes in the back of the net. Game over. Here's the issue with that, though. St. Louis came out like, okay, we just played 60 minutes, but we really didn't. It was kind of like, what is that? I can't even think of. Oh, Beer Fest, right? The famous quote that I'm not that drunk, right? Well, this was I'm not that tired. Okay, so they came out and they showed Boston that, hey, you ain't gonna get. We're gonna hammer you into the ground. We're gonna try and beat you within the first 5 minutes. And they did. They beat him in the first 5 minutes, and they did. They showed it, and they're like, oh, and by the way, we're gonna have 4 shots on goal, and you're gonna have a big fat 0. Okay, you're not even gonna have a chance. So, going into the overall game, okay, the game stats. Shots on goal were 37 St. Louis, 23 Boston. So, the roles were literally reversed because St. Louis didn't have that many shots in game 1, and they had around, Boston gave Bennington, I think, about 38 shots, and so on and so forth. So the roles were reversed. I think Boston think they had a chip on their shoulder, or that St. Louis just came out ready to play this time. I think they were kind of caught off guard, as you can say, maybe in the first game, but not in this game. They said, nope, not this time. We're going to come at you. Both teams were 50% on the faceoff dot. St. Louis was 0 for 3 on the power play. Boston was 1 for 5. St. Louis had 10 penalty minutes. Boston had 6 penalty minutes. Hits were 49-31. St. Louis having 49 and Boston having 31. That's dang near 50 hits in a game, and you're going to get those, but against another heavy hitting team and beating them almost by 20, that's a bit of an issue, and that needs to be addressed. I think personally that needs to be addressed, and for Boston to come out to win Game 3 in St. Louis. I understand that St. Louis is more of a road team than they are a home team, and maybe Boston can feed off of that a little bit. Just kind of, like, oh, we kind of lost. But now this is a game, it's a best of 5 game, and St. Louis has home ice advantage. If they win out of all home games, they win Stanley Cup in 6 games. So Boston, they don't need to worry about winning the first game, maybe catching them off guard in the first game, but they need to at least take one game to make it back to close to a Game 7. If they win in the second game, make that a Game 7 and having home ice advantage as it is. So we'll go into the goalie stats here real quick. Jordan Bennington was 21 of 23, a .913 save percentage, 2 goals against. Tuukka Rask was a 34 of 37, a .919 save percentage, and 3 goals against. So, Blues win 3-2, evens up the series 1-1, and Blues finally get their first win in a Stanley Cup Finals in franchise history. I think they've made the finals 3 times in their franchise, and they've been swept all times. And the last time was 49 years ago against the Boston Bruins. Ironic? A coincidence? Maybe? Maybe not. We'll see what ends up happening. The series is tied 1-1. It's going to be a great series. Boston obviously scores first in the power play. I thought, the Blues were gonna screw up because they gave up that first penalty so quick, and then they gave up the power play goal. I'm like, this could get ugly because then Boston could feed off of that, and they're gonna go for it. But they killed the 4 later off. They killed 3 plus a 17-second one, which really isn't that hard. But Blues were a much better team. And what kept this game so close to even going overtime was Tuukka Rask. Obviously, if you look at the numbers, numbers don't lie, having 34 saves on 37 shots, and some of those shots were very difficult, especially being screened, and so on and so forth. Big shot blocks came from both teams. That's a big thing. I like looking at the shot blocking because that tells me who wants to get in front of the net, who's going to protect their goaltender. It's defense is a team effort. That's all six players on your team that are defending one little piece of rubber from going into the back of the net. You can't just have the goalie, so that's why you have that. You have 5 other players in front of the goalie to try and stop the puck and clear people out. And when you lose games, that means that, one, you didn't clear people out of the way, especially if goalies are screening and they can't see it. No blame on either goalie for letting a goal in. I can't blame either one of them. There was no weak goals like there was in the first game. This was a game of basically goaltenders, and that's what it came down to, even though, they both gave up at least 2. But I'm glad the series is tied up because I was afraid, and I'm also glad the next game is on Saturday in St. Louis. I was afraid I have military duty this weekend, and I will be gone Friday through Sunday. I'll be back on Monday, but I was afraid that I was going to miss 2 games, and if Boston were to sweep them, I wouldn't have been here to watch. I mean, I would have been able to watch the game, but then I wouldn't have been able to give my thoughts out right away. But Game 3 will be hopefully Monday afternoon. I may combine it with Game 4, depending on how that goes. But I will be at the school. I'll be at Illinois Media School on Monday. That's where I go to school at, and I do a radio show up on actually at Chicagoland Radio with a couple of guys from 3 to 5. The name of the show is Cheap Seats. You can listen to it live on the TuneIn app, or also go to ChicagolandSportsRadio.com Facebook page, like the page. So we have a different abundance of students doing their own kind of radio shows, and they talk about whatever they want to talk about. Me personally don't have one of myself, but I am with a couple of guys. We talk NBA, we talk a bunch of other stuff. I'm more of characterized with the hockey stuff and baseball, and I'm hopefully going to bring out a VTech Talks sports, but I am in the work of progress on that. Be sure, like I said, to get the TuneIn app to listen to ChicagolandRadio.com. You can get all sorts of different podcasts, radio shows, live, stuff like that. Follow me on Twitter at IIVTechII, and like my Facebook page. It's the same thing as my Twitter, except it's podcast at the end of that. For any updates or anything else I post, I do have a website up there. You can click the link on. I did a blog post on the Chicago White Sox. If you're interested in that, I'll probably do more of that. But with school and being summertime and holidays and all this other stuff, it's kind of hard to try to put all that. I don't do this full-time job, so it's kind of hard to put all that stuff out. So, like I said, if you enjoy the podcast, be sure to share with your friends, comment, improvements, anything along the lines of that. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, rest of your evening, whenever you're listening to this, and hopefully catch you in the next podcast.